They're back.
Who?
The Empire. They're back.
What's up, MetaNerds? This video will be a complete breakdown of the Class 546 cruiser, which is essentially the Imperial successor to the Arquitens-class command cruiser. We'll use everything available to do a complete breakdown of the ship, from its weapons to complement, a tour of the interior, and take a wider look at the role of this ship, and even some speculation on the manufacturers, and some interesting behind-the-scenes facts. The Arquitens had been constructed by Kuat drive yards for use by the Republic during the Clone Wars, and they would continue producing this vessel into the Imperial era. There were some models that were not altered in any way except for the paint job, but most did receive some updates that cost up to 4 to 5 million credits, and included changes to the interior and weaponry. Racks for the new TIE fighters were installed, while the interior was redesigned for the dramatically increased crew, and storage for all the consumables that they would need. And then there were even some special Arquitens that received an even more dramatic overhaul, like the Thunder Wasp that got a larger hangar bay, and was a vessel upon which the then Captain Thrawn served as first officer. This craft was crucial to the Imperial victory over the Battle of Umbara. By the time we see Moff Gideon, circa 9 ABY, Thrawn is believed to be involved with some military presence in the galaxy. I should point out that one of the things Thrawn was known for was critiquing Palpatine's obsession with making ever larger ships, thinking that battle stations like the Death Star and Super Star Destroyers were a waste of resources. Better to have a more nimble fleet of ships in the size from Arquitens to Victory, since they all had more than enough firepower. And just in case someone sprinkled some force magic on their torpedoes, or flies a tiny A-wing into your bridge, you don't have to lose a spaceport-sized asset. It is possible that this is not Moff Gideon's flagship, and perhaps he does have an ISD out there somewhere. But I think Thrawn's philosophy makes even more sense when you are an Imperial Remnant force. This vessel, its armament and complement, is more than enough to oppose any opposition they would face, while also being more easily supplied and staffed, as being able to adapt to the abrupt collapse of supply lines after Endor had to be one of the most difficult parts of retaining power from the Imperial into the Remnant era. Almost all Imperial ships artificially increased the crew number from the Republic era, often by ridiculous multipliers, that led most to believe that this wasn't as much a statement of the technological needs of the vessel, but the result of Imperial politics. The Emperor wanted to have as many people as possible in debt to his war machine. So while the Republic Arquitens crew maxed out at 100, the Imperial variant now stated that it needed a crew of 750. This more than 7 times increase cannot be explained by anything else. It's just another example of how Palpatine was willing to kill 3 birds with 1 force choke. With these larger crews, it was a great way to deal with the potentially rowdy young people from the lower economic rungs of society, giving them jobs while also building an allegiance to the military.
You entered this facility as children, and in a few short weeks you will leave as soldiers. By the time you complete your training, you will be prepared to serve your Emperor.
Big Palpy was providing you credits, and the rebels were the ones killing your friends and trying to take away your paycheck. But of course, once those rebels proved victorious over Endor, these bloated crews had to be cut back. And though there are no official numbers for the crew sizes of the Class 546 cruiser, it's safe to say that it would have been a lot closer to that 100-man crew. As for the changes in weaponry, like we saw with the larger capital ships from the Venator to the Imperial Star Destroyer, there was a decrease in pure offensive and destructive capabilities, and an increase in things like tractor beams and ion cannons, reflecting a change in enemy from hordes of powerful droid fighters and CIS capital ships to the sneaky and fleeing rebel hit-and-run vessels. No more heavy port and starboard quad laser cannons, but it did retain the 4 launch tubes for missiles or torpedoes, and the dorsal and ventral pair of twin light turbo lasers, while adding a tractor beam projector for trying to detain rebels. Interestingly though, there was a variant of Republic Arquitens that did have a ventral laser cannon. The shot fired by the Class 546 that took out the Razor Crest could be a turbo laser blast, but every time we see those being fired, it's all 4 of the guns firing at once, never just that one bolt. So perhaps it was a separate weapon like a ventral gun. Though I admit I cannot find it, but if you think you spot something, be sure to comment it down below. And as a side note, we get a very unique look at the ship's heat signature. Note that it's showing that the hottest parts of the ship are the engines and the shields. Interestingly, not the weapon that was just fired, proving just how demanding those hangar shields are. And as for the sublight engines, there are 3 primary engines, while it adds 4 secondary ones for improved maneuverability and acceleration, while likely staying with a Class 2 hyperdrive, as that was what almost all of the Imperial capital ships possessed. Only things like starfighters and the Venator had faster Class 1 hyperdrives. The most unique tool in Gideon's arsenal are the 3rd generation Dark Troopers. They would deploy from these side hangars while being stored in their own designated chamber. This was a room along the outside edge, and like many on spacefaring vessels, it could be vented to remove unwanted cargo or dangerous materials. The midsection of this ship is one enormous hangar that has port and starboard openings, while there was also a smaller ventral bay. This may be similar to this area on the Venator, which had a crane that could secure a ship or vehicle, as well as move cargo. So although it's a small space, the compact TIE fighter rack design does make it so that this space could contain a few TIE fighters. And then there was the most impressive part of this ship, that central launch tube. This isn't just an exit, but is described as a launch tube, and notice how the TIEs accelerate, jolting ahead here faster than their normal acceleration. These blue lights that line the opening are not found in any other ship, and can be reasonably assumed to be making this opening function as a railgun that shoots out TIE fighters, either through magnetic force or a series of repulsors. These 4 exits made for an incredibly rapid deployment of its complement, just another thing that would be right up Thrawn's alley. Having a powerful mid-sized ship that could deploy a swarm of deadly fighters quicker than any other vessel out there, the railgun being perfect for the near-zero resistance environment of space. Official reports say that it held at least 8 TIE fighters, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was 12 or even 24 total, since a squadron is 12 fighters. So it would be weird if it carried less than 12. And remember, these TIE fighter rack designs are a great use of space. These hangars also contained at least 2 Imperial Transports, the apparent predecessor to the First Order transport. And so while the Dark Troopers had their jetpacks, these transports were perfect for moving Gideon's wide array of specialized equipment and troopers, having both mortar troopers and E-Web gunners, in addition to the previously shown flame trooper, proving that the Empire retained its strength if it did lose its size. Moving to the exterior, we see the docking tubes on the port and starboard sides for connecting to larger ships and spaceports. Just another way that these main cargo areas could be filled with everything from food, fuel, explosives, and weaponry. And perhaps to carry even more, this section where the body meets the engine array has been extended from its predecessors. Notice how the Arquitens comes to a point at the junction with the engine array. Here, the Class 546 adds these modular containers, 8 on each side. 16 massive containers that can make this thing stay out on missions even longer. There's also a slight change in that central rectangular strip along the dorsal side that's been widened a bit more and raised more than its predecessor. One of the biggest changes is on the bridge. Look at how narrow the bridge was in the original Arquitens, but in the Class 546, the space is now closer to that of the Venator or an ISD, having multiple terminals being operated by engineers, pilots, shield operators, communication specialists, security officers, and others, while the center of the room contained a large hollow terminal. This allowed Gideon to pull up high-res scans of locations and design battle plans, and we know that this ship has the ability to send long-range encrypted messages.
When we come out of hyperspace, send an encrypted message to Dr. Pershing. Let him know we have got our donor.
That message is possibly going to Kamino, Coruscant, or Biss. My speculation is that cloning researcher would be on the cloner's homeworld, or maybe the capital of the galaxy, hiding in plain sight where he could surely get access to anything he needed, or on Biss, where Palpatine was resurrected in Legends. As for some other details, like most ships of this size, there are elevators that connect each deck, and surveillance cameras that line every hallway and room. It is interesting to wonder if much of this ship is empty. When this ship gets attacked, it's not like they faced off against hundreds of stormtroopers. So since this ship was likely built during the Imperial era, there may have been whole sections for barracks and mess halls that were just completely abandoned. A potentially subtle form of demoralization, as you might have a remnant trooper being driven to avenge those that were lost, but he may also be growing to lose faith in the Imperial propaganda, likely having joined out of financial need, or at most out of a hope to be part of such an incredibly powerful military. Now looking down empty corridors and sitting in cavernous mess halls may have left some troopers feeling like they were holding on to a lost cause. Another thing to keep in mind is that Arquitens production stops in 4 ABY, but pirate groups and security bureaus held on to a few, and in Legends at least were able to hold on to them at least until the year 20 ABY, which would be 11 years after the events of the Mandalorian. And while we've been assuming that this was retained by Gideon throughout the fall of the Empire, it is possible that this was produced after Endor. Gideon, or perhaps even Thrawn, may have requested a ship with certain specifications to be fulfilled by the shipwright. As for which company that was, it could not be Kuat Drive Yards, as they were captured by the Rebels/New Republic forces in 5 ABY, So we can take a clue by the manufacturers that would end up working for the First Order. The company that supplied the capital ships was Kuat and Trala, and the TIE variants and shuttles were from Sinar Jamis. Execs and engineers from Kuat Drive Yards and Sinar Fleet Systems fled after the New Republic takeover and found partners in the smaller but still capable shipwrights on the planets Entrala and Jamis, which were located in the Outer Rim, conveniently being the two planets directly flanking Munilist, the homeworld of the Mun banking clan that had funded both sides of the Clone Wars. I have a separate video breaking down this ridiculously obvious clue as to who funded the First Order, so check out the card or description if you want to see that. Whether this ship was an Imperial holdover or something designed by Gideon or Thrawn, I think it is perfect for the Imperial Remnant. So that's it for the breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these behind the scenes facts. Sadly, I had to leave the size breakdown to the end here. This was confusing the Bantha Poodoo out of me, and then I tried seeing if anybody else was having luck with it, and there were a couple great threads on Reddit and Twitter that I found. Shout out to these guys, as this was way more detailed than what I was doing, and it does focus on the Lambda versus the TIE Fighter size. On Reddit, we see how really the size of the Arquitens has been off from the official stats and what we see on screen. But I really liked user ProPeach's post showing that it could be the 546 cruiser at 650 meters, which is reasonable for what is essentially an Arquitens 2, and the Empire always makes a bigger version of the predecessor, and would make for a cool spot between the Arquitens 1 and Victory. But that doesn't make sense with the launch tube. What the Twitter thread shows is that the only way to have that opening make sense is if this is some sort of mini Lambda variant. Less than half the size, but then that doesn't really make sense either with what we see on screen. So sadly, this may just be one of those ship sizes that we shouldn't think too long about. I still think it's a cool and useful design, and I'm sure there'll be some sort of official size for it in the future, even if, like with the original Arquitens, there's some inconsistency with how that's shown on screen. But what did you guys think of this ship? Did you like the TIE Fighter railgun idea? And do you think a ship like this makes more sense for Remnant forces than something like a bigger Imperial Star Destroyer? And what do you think about this maybe not being Gideon's flagship, that maybe he has a larger fleet hidden somewhere else? Let me know in the comments down below, and leave a like if you like this video, as liking and commenting are the best ways to show your support, since they really do help promote the videos on the YouTube algorithm. And be sure to subscribe if you want to see more. We have a giant playlist on ships and vehicles, and that breaks down into fighters or capital ships, and then other stuff like species and complete character stories. You can also check out the description for cool Star Wars metal print art and free Audible audiobooks, which give us a small commission at no extra cost to you. Special shout out to our supporters over on Patreon, especially our $25 tier, Chris Garcia, Cass Costello, C7Go, and Matthew Beltrami. But most important of all, remember, cool factor always comes before stats, and the Force will be with you, always.